but hey, welcome to our webinar on compliance in D365 for Finance and Operations. This is a presentation we had at DynamicsCon regional in Copenhagen this year, and we thought it was so interesting that it might also be fun to put on YouTube. Together with my good friend David, we'll be speaking a bit about this topic. First, a bit about myself. My name is Jonas. I'm a solution architect at the Nordic Investment Bank, and I'm a tech consultant at Lamalib in Denmark. I'm a Microsoft MVP in AI ERP. I live in Helsinki, but I'm from Denmark, as you most likely will hear from my accent. And I love traveling, French hot dogs, and geeking out about dynamics with jydekonsulenterne. And next one, we have David. I don't know if you can put yourself in the limelight, David.
Yeah, hello. I'm David. I work as a lead consultant for Asia Zone in the Netherlands. Also live in the Netherlands. We have a cat. Yeah, not much to say. I like good food, good beer, of course, originally from Bavaria, and every day I go to the gym. So, yeah.
Thank you, David. Today we'll have some rules of engagement. Please keep your microphones muted except when making remarks, comments, or joining discussions in order to avoid background noise. It's okay to ask questions during the session. Just remember to raise your hand. Please only provide constructive forward-moving criticism and comments. It's okay to also put banter in the chat, but please no banter if you unmute. One voice at a time, and we all here to learn from each other. We are taking time out of our spare time to present today. And also no excessive advertising. So I'll start by talking a bit about what this presentation will not be. So this presentation will not be the typical and comfy Microsoft bashing. So if you have ever joined a session on security and Microsoft technologies, you'll most likely have heard many times that Microsoft is to blame for everything pretty much, but we also need, but we kind of want to also keep in mind that Microsoft is a large provider of technology and they are not always to blame if there is an incident. This will also not be a don't do this and don't do that type of talk. What we are saying is our recommendation and our advice, but take it as you want. It might not fit in your organizations. Me and David are not really huge fans of law text and chunks of text in presentations. So we'll also not share a bunch of text in the slide. It will be kind of fun and engaging. And we also try to keep the number of slides to a minimum. Also, I'm not really a big PowerPoint guy, so I try to not make too much mess. So before we start, I'd like to ask you all a question. Who here in this room can tell if right now in their Power Platform and Dynamics for Finance and Operations, someone is mass downloading sensitive data and be able to detect and analyze and report this to the authorities until tomorrow evening? Who here can do this? I thought so. Well, in that case, you are joining the right webinar today or this afternoon. So the agenda for today is a quick look at the reference architecture of Dynamics and Power Platform. We'll look a bit on Finance and Operations. Then David will take over and talk about Dynamics customer engagement. And then we'll talk a bit about today and what is coming in the future. And then we'll wrap up and give you all something to take away from this session. If you look at the reference architecture of Finance and Operations and Power Platform, we start by looking at the Power Platform tenant. The Power Platform part consists of multiple different applications, all backed by a data layer in Dataverse. We have Copilot, we have apps, we have sales, and we have customer insights. If we then take in the rest of the architecture, we see that we have the finance and operations kind of in its in a separate box, but they are still interconnected. We have a separate application layer and we have a separate data layer, but they are all connected with the same infrastructure. And we see also that it's connected with the same security measures and authentication measures. Then we have an Azure integration layer that we typically use to integrate the different systems. We have logic apps and we have a service bus and we have different other integration methods. And then we have the integration layer in Azure. Now, if you only take out the finance and operations part, we see that we have a bunch of common issues. One of the biggest issues that I've seen recently is CEO fraud. And CEO fraud is when someone calls up an organization or sends an invoice or something and say, you need to send me a bunch of money, but there's no real processes in place to avoid this. Then I also often see that we have a lack of log analytics that can cause unknown data corruptions and invisible incidents. Later in this session, David will talk a bit about why this is a problem, but it's important as you will learn because of EU regulations that will come in the future, or it's already here. And then we have data compliance. Okay, what is data compliance and what is GDPR and why do we care about it? And then finally, it is difficult to kind of implement a shared ALM strategy with Power Platform and F&O, as they are kind of all in the same applications and they are worked with in different ways. I have something that I like to call a nasty audit question generator. And this is kind of a tale from the real world. This is not the original title I had for this slide, but I thought I might change it because I'm an old guy and I like to yell at Klaus sometimes because of the industry I'm in. Now, the first really nasty audit question generator is admins or vendors running scripts in production without any oversight. Who here have ever received an incident at 9 o'clock at night and you need to change some data and the customer is asleep? Okay, let's just go into production and run a quick script without telling anyone. The next one might be a bit controversial, especially if you have partners that have developed it. We have something in my old job that I'm not going to say, that's called a super table browser, where you can go in and run SQL against a database. And the worst part is showing how to customers how to do it. So essentially give customers a way to run SQL against a production database without any oversight. And then why not just give everyone the system administrator role? Because why spend money creating roles? It's just easier that way. So here are kind of my recommendations. If you are running finance and operations and want to kind of keep a track on and if you can make your finance and operations compliant. The first one is well known for most that works with finance and operations. Is implementation of the workflow tool and segregation of duties when processing documents and master data updates. Now, when I talk about workflows, it's not just click here, send it to someone, and then approve it. Here, we are talking about the process of defining how in your organizations you are going to delegate approvals of documents such as invoices and payment journals and so on. Now the next one is establishing cross-domain teams in your organization so you can collaborate on shared Power Platform strategies. Now, who here has ever tried to implement DuaRide? Oh, you have, David. Now, DuaRide, it kind of shows the different mentalities when you work with CRM teams and ERP teams. So in CRM teams, it's easy to just push something to production, while in ERP, there you don't just put something into production without following a strict process. So it's important to set some kind of cross-domain team that can demo or can tell the CRM team that now you are running in the same application pretty much. Then there is this thing that's called the User Security Governance feature or D365 Admin Toolkit. This is a way where you can leverage tools in finance and operations to avoid giving too wide roles, so you can narrow it down. A good example from us is that we have given consultants from externals only the roles they need to do specific tasks. For example, if they need to assist in audit work, okay, then they'll only be given audit roles. Now, this is not strictly finance and operations, but is sitting down with your organization and defining a process for how to deal with GDPR relevant information, like the right to be forgotten or database movements. If you implement customer insight journeys today, there is no real good way to get rid of GDPR data if you're running DuaRide. So if you are using these one platform applications, then it's important to set a team that can investigate how to deal with this information. The last thing, implement application insights and Sentinel in your application to get insights into what is going on. And this is something that's been blogged a bit about, but it is possible. And we will also be providing more content in the future on it. For example, how can you implement Defender for Cloud for finance and operations? Now, David, it's your turn now. So if you can share your screen.
Yeah, hello. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, then first of all, thanks, Jonas, for the FO insights, an area where I have almost no knowledge. So very little. Yeah, so I would take over now for the CE part, Power Platform, Customer Engagement, whatever you want to call it. And we start again with the reference architecture. Now we shift more to the left. And I just want to mention a couple of, I would say, not mistakes, but problems I have seen in the past 5-6 years. And first of all, Microsoft very strongly pushed a couple of years ago this citizen maker, citizen development movement, I would say, which in a nutshell is good. You bring software very fast to the users, you speed up the process, etc. But I saw a lot of times that basically those apps run under very high permissions with service principal, with admin, etc. And this can pose significant security problems down the line. So I just mentioned a couple of legal paragraphs here, but that's basically not good. And I've seen it happen quite a bunch of times. So make sure when you have this kind of citizen developer movement that you do it in a, I would say, secure way. Then the second point is what we already teased in the beginning, that at the moment when you work with a product like the Power Platform, that's out of the box, not, for example, NIS2 compliant, because you don't lack this near real-time incident response, which we will show in a moment how to deal with that. But that's a big one if you are affected by the NIS2 guideline or law. Then the next one, no data retention. So at the moment, as far as I know, it's not possible to kind of auto-delete out of the box data. And why this is important? Because according to GDPR, you're not allowed to keep the data forever. Because, how to say, what many people don't know is that you are not the owner of the data. So when you have personal data that is GDPR protected, you are so-called the processor, but the owner is the person, like the natural person. This is the actual owner. And you cannot just keep data forever. So that's also something you have to take into consideration. Delete after 7 years, after 10 years, there are different national regulations, of course. Then the next one is not inherently a problem of the Power Platform. Also, other low-code platforms, I will not mention names, of course, here have this problem is that it's very hard to track abnormal admin behavior. So what I mean with that is, let's say an admin goes into your environment or into your tenant and he starts deleting environments, or he does things that usually should not happen. That's very hard to track. And you could wake up Monday morning and your stuff is gone. So, and the next one is, I added this, which I have seen in the last 4 to 8 weeks, a couple of times, 4 or 5 times, is that people make use of Copilot, Foundry, basically train their own AIs in corporations. And they just use the data that they have, for example, invoices, all kinds of information. They just use this data to train, to fine-tune their AI tools internally. And basically, if you do that and you use people's data, that's illegal, because GDPR is purpose-bound, and for every purpose you need approval by the person. And training AI is definitely not your typical user business case. So if you do this, if you just take, let's say, invoice from production and you train your AI with that without consent of every single person, that's not allowed. So it's just a couple of points to take into consideration in your next implementation project. So how to keep this baseline? We said in the beginning we will not mention a lot of legal text because that's not good. I don't like that. So we try to kind of put it into a circle to kind of give an understanding when you work in a project and you work in some parts of the project, which law you need to kind of take into consideration. So when you say you work with process and security, you need to kind of take care of NIS2 already, but also Product Liability Directive, which basically means that you are legally liable for the correctness of your product. So if you have a flaw, a bug, or whatever you want to call it, basically the customer can bring you to court. Then when you work with AI and data, of course, GDPR, I think nowadays everyone should know that. If not, this might be a problem. And you have the European Union AI, and that is now almost every day in the media, which is the new regulation, but there are some tensions around that. But pay attention when you work with AI and data. AI Act and GDPR should be on your agenda. When you work with products and services, NIS2 again, and from 2027, the so-called Cyber Resilience Act. What does this mean? This means when we have a Microsoft product, Microsoft needs to make sure that the product is secure by design and by default. So it doesn't affect you that much, but it will be a big one in 2027. So those are kind of an overview to avoid a lot of text on the slide. So how can you bring this into action? And what I always say is, sounds a bit weird, but you can go to the Microsoft Learn website, and the Microsoft Learn website offers a lot of very good compliance documentation. And what I mean with very good is they explain topics like GDPR, AI Act in a very, I would say, understandable manner. And you don't need to read all those PDFs from the European Commission with the hundreds of pages of paragraphs. So basically you can go to Microsoft Learn, where you anyways are very often, I would assume. Just read the articles there. They're not super long, but they give a good understanding, I would say, from all the most relevant laws. And to be fair, we said we will not bash Microsoft. When I compare this to other vendors, they do a really good job, I would say. Then, yeah, if you work with CE, Power Platform, you should integrate this application platform. In the end, it says it is a platform, right? So you should speak to your enterprise architect, to the enterprise architect of your customer, to some high-level tech person, to include this into your, it's called enterprise risk map. So basically, you need to do a risk management, risk assessment of your whole infrastructure landscape, and then you can manage it, because if you don't know it, if you don't see it, you cannot manage it, obviously. And yeah, I mentioned a couple of tools. Purview, of course, it's the big one. Workspaces for logs and Sentinel, which we will see later on. That's not a must, but I just put it here if you are able to deploy the Power Platform Center of Excellence. It's definitely a good starting point. It's a big solution, I know, and it needs to be maintained, but it contains a lot of tools that Microsoft offers you to just improve your operational compliance, I would say. But make sure that it's pro and cons for you, because it's a big solution you need to maintain. So make sure that the pros outweigh really the effort that you need to put in. Yeah, I said here connect Dataverse to Microsoft Purview. That's not so well known, I would say, in the community at the moment, but you can do that. So basically, you can already track changes. I tried it myself. You can track changes already in Dataverse with Microsoft Purview. And from what I know is that Microsoft is also working on a complete Purview integration into Dataverse, which basically means you can do the retention policy that I mentioned earlier in Purview, and then the user, for example, cannot delete record A, or record B will be deleted after 5 years automatically, and those kind of things. But I assume it will take some time because of the technical layers in between. Yeah, and that's the big one at the end. Make sure that when you work with a product like the Power Platform, that you have at least one DLP, data loss prevention policy, ready. Why do I mention that? Because when I ask people if they work with the Power Platform, they say yes. And then I ask, do you have DLPs in place? They say yes. And then I ask, do you have this also for the default environments of the users? And then the answer is in 99% of the cases, no. And then I explain that the default environment that every user gets is a huge loophole for data breaches. And this happened in the past. You may not read it in the news, but when you speak to people from Microsoft, they, in German, we say unter der Hand. So basically, face to face, they tell you that there have been significant breaches via default environments, because people can connect Google Drive, OneDrive, private drives, etc. And then basically the data flows out of your organization. So make sure that is covered. And yeah, of course, we don't want to only talk. We also want to show a little bit. So I will stop the screen sharing here. Not the screen sharing, the presentation. And show you a couple of things. So first things first, we mentioned Sentinel already. And the interesting part is when you go to Sentinel, you go, of course, to securitymicrosoft.com, and then you log in. And on the left side, you see, I would say 80% of the Microsoft security tools already. I think Purview is still extra. A couple of ones are still extra, but Microsoft seems to move them all to this securitymicrosoft.com. And when you go to basically to Sentinel, you go to the content management and content tab. You see all kinds of those integrations. You see here already AWS. You see a lot of those tools, but you can also type something which is called business. Let's see. Maybe I have to type the whole one. And then you see something which is called Microsoft Business Applications. And of course, I have it already all installed, but when you click Manage, and by the way, I forgot to say, to use that, you need a log analytics workspace in your Azure to basically, so that the logs flow around. And what you see here basically are integrations that Microsoft already gives you. So for example, analytics rules, when we scroll a little bit down, you see more kinds of FO also. So finance operations also mentioned here. And what this is basically a KQL query on your log. So this means we can just open one and then say, I don't know, active rules. And here you see it's a bit small. But here you see basically the KQL query behind. And what this means is that Microsoft already writes those queries and alerting for you. So you don't need to write all those things on your own. Technically speaking, you can. You can just get rid of Sentinel, go to your log analytics workspace, and do all the alerting on your own. But here it's quite a nice offering, I would say. And that's also a little bit why I don't like this Microsoft bashing, because they really offer a lot of tools that you can just make use of. And you see also the connectors. Let's go to the next one. Second. And here on the bottom, you see something which is called Playbook. We will see this in a moment. And what this means is basically, let's say you have this routine that ran and there is something went wrong. The admin deletes environments, a user deletes records, user exports, mass exports to Excel too much. This is something I also see often with the customers. They ask this question, what if the user exports to Excel too often? I said, yeah, you can check that. So, or you can turn it off in the security rule if you don't want to allow that. But then no one can do it, so that's always a middle way. And basically a playbook in the backend is just a logic app that triggers and runs through. So how this looks like is we are now in an incident, and let's bring in another user just to illustrate maybe one. So we have here a user, right? Just a random name. And you see that the user can just click around, open the records, and basically all good, right? And when you want to trigger such a runbook, you go into the incident and you see on top there's a small button. It's called Play Runbook or Runbook. And then basically you can see I have here two now, but I will just run that one. And what happens now is that this logic app gets triggered by this incident and then does whatever it does. In my case, what will happen is that the security roles of the users will be removed. So the user basically at this point cannot work anymore in the respective environment where he is working in, most likely production. So we can also see that. So when we go, basically we click further, then you will be referred to Azure. And then you see basically that the logic app went through. And now we can just check if this actually worked. And you see basically when the user will try to do something else, click on the next record or something like this, then he will not be able to do anymore. To be fair, that's not 100% solution, because the access token the user still has. If you want to basically end the user session directly, you can use something which is called Defender for cloud apps. But that's a huge implementation if you don't want this 1 minute or 2 minute time gap that the user clicks around, right? So that was that one. And yeah, of course, that's only, I would say, one implementation where you can go from the legal paragraph that we showed for the real-time alerting that you need through a design pattern, event sourcing, and then which to implement Sentinel/log analytics workspace. And then you went down from the legal regulation to the actual technical implementation in a good manner. Okay, so 1 second. I will go on with the presentation. Where is it here? So, of course, we want to give also a small outlook, right? Because we mentioned a couple of things, but with legal compliance stuff, it's always good to look a little bit into the future, because when it comes, like NIS2 is coming now also in the Netherlands, in Germany, that's now in the final stages, and then it's all over Europe. And then you need to be compliant by day one. So it's good to be to look a little bit ahead. And let's say you go with the Microsoft stack, which I think is still a good choice. I like it. And then you have something which I mentioned earlier, the Cyber Resilience Act. For us, not that big of a deal because it's more on Microsoft, that they make all those tools here, all the tools that they offer secure by design. And but my gut feeling tells me that this one will be bigger than NIS2 and GDPR combined, because it will be a huge effort, I would say. Then you kind of go from the tools and you go one level down. You have a data layer, GDPR. I think there might be adjustments coming to GDPR. I read yesterday that the European Union wants to make it a bit softer. So this might be good for, I would say, tech people. And AI usage, security processes. I have a couple of tools here like Sentinel, Purview, and some AI tools on the left. The AI Act, I was told they want to now, how to say, put it a bit on hold because of political pressure from United States of America. This is now also going in a kind of adaptation process. So there might be a little bit of lift here, I would say, less strict. But for now, we need to adhere to that. So I just want to give you kind of an overview here. And yeah, lastly, we prepared a kind of, how to say, overview, right? So let's go one slide further, or let's call it cheat sheet. But I don't know actually, Jonas, is this presentation later shared, or is this kind of, I don't know how this works. If yes,
presentation will be shared. Yes.
Okay, good. So basically, I will not read out the whole pattern, but what you can see here is if you start with an FO or Power Platform project, we kind of prepared a 101 cheat sheet. Of course, that's not in the deepest of details, but you do see that some is a pre-sales stage, which often is like an RFP that you get from a customer. Someone walks in, hey, I need to do a cloud migration. I need to do a tenant migration, what I'm doing now at the moment. So basically, it's like a pre-sales stage, and someone comes, okay, I need to do this, I need to do that. And then you can basically see, okay, let's do this in a structured manner and try to not make the mistakes that I mentioned on top already in the beginning. And when you are in the process, then in the project phase already, basically also a couple of tips. I mentioned here the Power Platform WAF. That's quite a good source. Also, there's also an Azure well-architected framework, which, by the way, Jonas, when I spoke to some people in Copenhagen, a lot of people apply this Azure WAF and also Power Platform, so it gets more popular. Oh, sorry for that. And yeah, and then basically an overview table again. So you can kind of use that as a starting point. Of course, only as a starting point, right? Did I just say framework? No, I don't know if this is a framework. I would call it more PIM, I don't know, 101 cheat sheet. Framework should be more comprehensive. So as you see, there are no paragraphs here. And no legal validation and those kind of things. So it's really just top down. And yeah, so basically, I think that's it. Of course, there's always a room for questions. I will now stop the sharing again.